Welcome again. Today's video is going to be a long one. This is going to be dedicated to automation in Prism. This is quite a big section and it has multiple tabs from focusing to plate solving to startup and shutdown. So what I'll do is I'll make a long video and then I will create some links in the description that will link you directly to the portion. So there'll be a link to click on and go straight to the focusing tab. And this way you can go straight to the section you need instead of watching the entire thing. Stay tuned. So the way you open up the automatic observation is you go straight to this icon up here, which is the blue icon, and you press on it. This opens the automatic observation in Prism. This is designed to be autonomous, so you plug in the targets you want and then Prism is on its way. So let's discuss the first tab, targets and objects. This is divided into two portions, the top portion and the bottom portion. So let's go through them. Add an object, you click on this and then it adds an object to this list. So we can try a given object like M31. When you look up the object's coordinates above, Prism already knows what the coordinates are from the sky chart that's already built in. So you press this button and then it gives you the RA and DEC. So you tell it what the exposure length is in seconds, and then you tell it what the binning is. You can have different binning if you want, 1/2 if you wish. But for the sake of this demonstration, we'll stick to 1/1. Amount of images, say you want 100. And here you can define what you want to do with your filters. If you have a one-shot color, this is a non-issue. If you have a filter wheel with filters, this is where you decide where these are. Bear in mind that once your filter wheel is connected, Prism can know what the numbers of filters are and what their names are. For example, if you have L, RGB, and HA, L will be 1, R will be 2, and so on and so forth. You can perform auto guiding, and then you can tell it what the guide exposure is. If you have a rotator, you can decide where the angle is if you want to frame your objects better. The bottom checkboxes perform auto guiding. You can check this if you want to auto guide, and check it if you want to go unguided. Say you're imaging an asteroid and you're only doing 30-second exposures, so maybe you should dodge auto guiding. Perform focusing on this object. When you click this, is when Prism gets to this object, it'll autofocus again. This could be the same thing for filters per se. When he finishes when he switches to the red filter, it'll shift the focuser and perform autofocus. So press OK. Delete all. This just deletes everything, as the name implies. So let's do this again for the sake of this demonstration. Look it up. Different area and declination, of course. It's a different target. 300. A number of images, filter wheel, and we're good. Import object list. So this option here imports objects that are in the object list. For example, let's take an example and let's pick a nebula or a galaxy. So if you double click on this object right here, or this object LBN 688, you have all this information about it. And then if you go to more, you can add this object to an object list like this. So now it's quantified in here with the name and everything. So close this. Let's say you want to image multiple objects tonight. Let's say you want a dark nebula. We do the same thing, press more, add the object to the object list. Here we are, it's object number 2. Let's add a third object. Just say you want to do all these objects in one night and you want to just take 500 exposures of each. Here we go. So now if you go back to the automatic observation and you press this button, import object list, It's going to say this will import 3 objects from the object list and delete previous list. Do you want to proceed? Press yes. So now all the objects are imported. The object name says several objects. So what you do is you say, I want a 300-second exposure, binning one by one. I want one image each with filter number 1. And I want to perform auto-gating and autofocus with 2-second exposures for auto-gating. Press OK. And here you are. All these objects are in here now. You can save this list, of course. You can save it and call it my list if you wish. You can load this list. Let's delete these. You can load this list. Here it is. Or you can just choose to delete one. Merge list is an option to merge 2 lists, to compile 2 lists. Just in case you have this list and another list, you can just press this button and you can import a second list to compile it with this. The edit button, of course, opens this window to edit the target. You can duplicate it just in case you want, say you want to image the same object but with filter number 2. So you press on this and you go down to filter and press filter number 2. Here we go. Now filter, there's 1 and here's 2. So if you have your LRGB filters labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, all you do is you go to this button right here, duplicate for LRGB. Let's pick another object, M42. Collect the coordinates, 300 seconds, and let's go. Then you press on this and you say, here we go, LRGB 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you can just do RGB if you wish, if you want to skip luminance altogether. Here we go, RGB. Now say you want to do the green filter first. You press this button up and then it moves it up. Or you can move them up and down if you wish. If you would like to loop this sequence to where it shoots 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, imagine that you have a limited time night. Say you have only 2 hours and you want to collect RGB data instead of doing all the R's, all the G's, and all the B's. You can press this button, loop the sequence. You can do an infinite loop or you can do a finite loop of, say, you want to collect 12 exposures per filter, so we do 12. So it's going to do RGB and then it's going to go back and do RGB and go back and do RGB for this sequence 12 times, which will give you 12 frames per filter. Let's remove this, we don't need it. Perform observations in this order. This is an interesting one and a powerful one, so let's delete these. Let's go back over here. Now imagine that you want to image this object and another object. Let's say you do 5 objects, more, and then add to object list. So now you have 5 objects. Let's import all of them. And let's say you want to do 300 seconds each. Here we go. You can choose to tell Prism to perform these observations in this exact order. If this is your preference, Prism can do that. It'll go to LBN 688, then B219, and so on, go down the list. If you don't check this, Prism has a smart algorithm, and it will go to the westernmost target. So it'll start the observation with this target, and then go, I would think, to this target. Then I think this target, and then the last one. The reason it does this is it images that whichever one sets first, which means that target has the least time towards setting than all the other objects. So it starts with that. It's very powerful. But if you choose this option for some reason and you want it to be done exactly like that, it will go to these targets as you listed them. At the bottom here, it's duration estimation. This is a kind of gross estimation of how long it takes to do all these exposures. This is not meant to be hyper accurate. It does not take into account your focus time, your place solving time, your slew time, and so on. So this is a crude estimate of how long it'll take to perform all these observations for you. These buttons down here, they load the entire configuration of the automatic observation. If you set all these tabs the way you want, you can just save them and then call them every time. If you want a quick way of recording all these parameters, so imagine you find the right parameters for your system and you want a quick way to save this, you can press this button to record the parameters into one default file that's called every time you open Prism and then open the automatic observation. This button right here is a quick and easy way to do it. If you have multiple setups, you can save the configuration for each setup. An example, if you have a setup with a small refractor, that means you don't have to focus every 30 minutes. Now, if you have a 16-inch Newtonian, you might want to focus every 30 or 45 minutes. Therefore, you can save a configuration file for each one of them and recall it every time. The Focusing tab, that's the second tab here. All right, so it's split up in a few sections. Let's start with the first section. Focusing conditions. If you press this button, perform focusing every 30 minutes per se. Prism will start a timer, and when 30 minutes or X minutes elapses, it'll actually autofocus again. This is irrespective of the filter. It just autofocuses. This is good for big mirrors and big systems that need to refocus every so often. For people with moving mirrors and systems that are not solidly locked down, this option is good if you slew every so many degrees. So if you slew, say, 90 degrees away from your initial target, Prism will autofocus. So if here there's a note, nota bene, if no focusing device is linked, all focusing actions requests will be ignored. This is in case a focuser is not actually attached and available to use. Catalog to be used to find star for focusing. So you can choose what catalog to use here. Remember that the GSC ACT is built into Prism, and these two catalogs are available on my website in the download section. So you can just point it to which one to use. Also, these need to be set up in settings and then star catalog path settings. You need to tell Prism what these catalogs are. Image grab. Center focus window automatically. So this will keep the star focus in the window as it moves along, just in case it's focusing the star and the star shifts. So it focuses it centers the window over that. This option, focusing setup, this option over here keeps this star focus in the window. So these two go hand in hand. Now, what are these options? So imagine you're imaging a star cluster. You can tell Prism to shift the telescope and look for a star outside a given range. Say you want to get out of your 1 degree field of view of your scope. You can tell it, I want to go a minimum of 1.5 degree minimum and 3 degree maximum. So it searches in that radius for the star you tell it. To search for these stars, it uses the GSC ACT catalog, which has got plenty of stars, so no worries there. Minimum magnitude for focusing. Mine, I use between 10 magnitude and 12 magnitude. This works for my system. If you have a fast system, that means that a star of magnitude 6 or 8 might not work to focus because it saturates quickly. It reaches your saturation level. So what I suggest you do is you take sample images of a star and measure the intensity of the star in ADUs. So if your system at 3 seconds, binned 1 by 1, saturates with a magnitude 6 star, you might want to try a magnitude 8 star or a magnitude 10 star. This is easy to do, and I'll make a video that's separate from this and how to figure that one out. It's super simple. Focusing range in encoder steps. Now you need to know what the focusing range of your system is. First of all, you need to figure out your critical focus zone and then multiply that by the number of iterations that Prism will use. In this instance here, if your focuser steps per focusing iteration is 100, that means you're going to do 10 iterations between these focuser steps. Focusing needs to be figured out before this automatic observation works. Pretty much everything in your system needs to work. Your plate solving, your pointing, your focusing, and so on. So all this needs to be done manually. The beauty of the automatic observation is that when everything is figured out for your system, then your system becomes autonomous at that point. All you got to do is give it the targets and it's on its way. Image window radius in pixels. So this is self-explanatory. How big is the focusing window? How big do you want it to be? If your stars get really big, maybe you can go to 50 pixels instead, but 25 to 30 does. HDF centroid radius in pixels. So Prism will look for the centroid of the star in 8 pixels, in the radius of 8 pixels. I suggest you use the default value, and you can increase it up and down if you wish. Depends on your system. Exposure time in seconds. I prefer to use 3 seconds to expose the CCD to get a good enough star for focusing. Again, my system works good for 3 seconds and for a star between 10 and 12 magnitudes. Minimum signal. This is a signal, the signal of the star in ADUs above the background noise for this star to be used. You can experiment with this. You can go up to 500 or stay at 1, which is fine. Apply focus offset. This offset is a manual offset that is needed if you wish to include an offset for your system for whatever reason. For some science applications, people figure out that if they defocus a star a little bit, it's actually better for their measurements. So you can defocus a star manually if you wish. If filter wheel is linked, the focusing range is applicable to the reference filter. Automatic offsets are performed for other filters. So what this is that the filter wheel is linked. The focusing range is applicable to the reference filter only. So this will shift the focus filter, like say your main filter is luminance and you have filter offsets up or down from that for your other filters. So this offset applies to the reference filter only. Automatic offsets between the luminance and your other filters are taken into account according to the filter offsets you have. Prism uses filter offsets for all your filters. It's a really easy way to figure out what's the difference between the thicknesses, if you would, of your filters, so that it makes this operation simple. As an example, if you have LRGB, hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, you need to go one time and figure out what's the difference between luminance and all the other filters. And this is called filter offsets. And all these have to be figured out one time and included in your filter wheel. This way, Prism always focuses with the luminance filter. It's very simple and easy to do. And then when you go in the automatic observation and you shift to the red filter, it focuses with the luminance and then applies the filter offset between the luminance and the red filter. And this is a really easy way to have very sharp images. Dome and shelter management. If you check this box, it means that execute the following .exe or a batch file to open the dome slit or shelter, if not handled by Prism. What this means is if you have a dome or a roll-off roof with a controller that does not have an ASCOM driver, but can be operated by an .exe or a batch file, Prism can actually do that for you. It can execute an external program for this to open the shelter and close it for you. For a dome, you can perform periodic dome resets every so many minutes if your controller handles that. What this does is it could be imaging, and then once it gets to this timer, it'll home it will home your dome just in case it loses track and accuracy over time. This could be very beneficial. So let's go left to right, top to bottom. You can show Prism where to save these images. For remote operation, it'll be good to save this directly into a Dropbox or OneDrive file. Folder creation. Do we create a folder per the date? Do we create it per the object name, or do we not create it at all? You can just dump all these into this, whatever folder you show it. Now, I like to create object names folders, because now you have all the images of the same object in the same folder. If you imagine, like, put in a lot of data in there. So we can name the files according to loop number. If you're imaging M8, for example, over a week, these loop numbers would be called M8-1, M8-2, M8-3, M8-4. Or if you image them, like we discussed here, when you loop these objects here, it'll actually put a loop number in there, if you think that is useful. You can put the date into this, the date string into the file name, so you know what one was, where these objects taken. You can save the center region of 512 by 512 to check resolution. This is very useful if you want to check how sharp your stars were. You can also save fully binned versions to check the image position. In case plate solving is hyper important and you wanted to check that all these images were taken exactly where you want to take them. Compute sharpness of the image. Prism will calculate from a region, the central region of your image, a 512 by 512 square, and you'll calculate the elongation and the seeing. This is very useful to see what when you check the log the next morning to see how good you're tracking / guiding. This is the elongation number, and you're seeing. If seeing is bad, then your stars will be bloated and you lose sharpness and so on. For weather management, use cloud sensor data to pause and resume observations. This is very, very powerful in Prism. Say you have a cloud watcher, and like the AAG cloud watcher from Lunatico. This is an excellent cloud watcher to use for automated imaging. What it does is, if the cloud watcher declares the sky state to be unsafe, say it got too windy, say the clouds came in, Prism will actually park your scope and wait. It keeps the camera cooled, it keeps everything running, and it closes the shutter or the roof and waits. And it waits until the cloud watcher declares the sky state to be safe again or clear again, and then Prism will take that signal and open the roof or slit and resume imaging. It pauses and resumes the entire night as you sleep. Though imagine that this is completely autonomous and you don't have to do anything when it comes to this. This will save you an enormous amount of time, and you can just let Prism handle all your equipment, and you can do something else like sleep if you work in the morning. Auto guiding. So what happens when Prism cannot detect a star or there's nothing found? Imagine you're using an off-axis guider and you just can't find a star. Well, you have options here. You can proceed to the next object if you have multiple objects. If you have multiple filters, this doesn't help very much. But if you have multiple actual targets, it'll go to the next one. It can search in the radius of 2 arc minutes around the object. So it will move the mount around the object you're trying to image, and it will look for a guide star. This is very powerful. Or it could reduce your imaging time. So say you're imaging M27 and you want it to do 300 second or 5-minute exposures. Your mount can track with reasonably good results. It can track for up to 60 seconds. You can lower this to 60 seconds and Prism will just give up guiding entirely and start imaging 60-second exposures. If you wish to acquire data regardless of what happens. This option here, if guide star is not found, increase exposure time up to. You can tell Prism, I'm comfortable with my mount taking 10-second exposures with the guide camera to get faint stars. So if your mount guides well, you can increase the exposure to 5, 6, 10, up to 10 seconds maximum. And this is what Prism will do. It'll increase the exposure incrementally until it reaches the maximum to look for a star. This gives you a few great strategies to overcome loss of stars or no stars to guide on. This option we use a secondary camera to guide or I use as an embedded chip, just like the big STLs that have embedded chips in them. Note, if guidance CCD is not connected, a warning will be issued. Guidance parameters are set from the manual dialog forms. What this is telling you is if the guider is not connected, it'll give you a warning, and the guidance parameters are actually set in the guiding portion of the secondary camera control panel. That'll be, let's bring out the demo camera. The settings are set here when you start your guiding. Of course, you have to be connected to the telescope, but they're set in here. Whatever parameters are set in here apply in the automatic observation. So the camera here, you can for your framing for the main camera, you can flip these the image to X and Y, or you can rotate it 90 degrees if you wish. And if, for example, you're doing occultations or some asteroid work, you can choose to use half of the frame or quarter of the frame to save on download time. If you're trying to take a lot of images of a very fast event, like asteroid occultation of a star, for example, the entire event could be 30 seconds. So you might want to reduce the frame size to reduce the download side of, say, a big chip like the KAF 11000. It's huge. In the telescope tab, this will take care of plate solving and a lot of very important functions. Let's start from left to right, top to bottom. Do not slew below elevation of a certain number of degrees. So with this, this is where Prism starts and stops imaging. So say you don't want to image below 30 degrees, and you know, for an object that is rising or setting. So that's why you set it here. This stops imaging entirely and goes to the next object, or if this is your last object, it'll shut down after that. You can set your meridian angle slew limits if you wish, east and west. You can avoid moon proximity. If you don't want to be close to the moon, you can set this to 90 degrees if you wish, and stay completely away. And Prism will image all the targets that are greater than 90 degrees from the moon. Perform plate solving on a new field for improved pointing. This is if you want to image one set target and you have framing, for example, as we saw in the image grab option. You can choose to only take a quarter of the image. For example, if you're doing like an asteroid event, you can do that, and it plate solves every time to make sure that object is dead center. We support astrometry.net as a failover, and this is the option where to choose that. If all the plate solving fails inside Prism, we can send it to astrometry.net. This is either local or remote, and this is set up in your software setup here, and this tab. You can set up remote or local. I have a forum post about how to install it on a local server. You should just visit my forum, which is on the site. You can perform plate solving corrections every so many minutes if you wish, every 16 minutes, to make sure you're still dead onto the field. After slewing, wait for backlash compensation. This is in case you have backlash in your gears and you wish to have some sort of a delay. So Prism would slew and then would wait for this timer to expire to proceed. You can dither your exposures. This is really good for unguided systems with ASAs and 10 microns and the Nova 120 or 200 for that matter. This is dither. So every time a frame is downloaded, Prism will dither, introduce an error willingly of this magnitude, which is 10 arc seconds in this instance. And this is random in RA or DEC. You can perform slewing clearances if your system needs that. This is in meridian angle on DEC for fork mounts as well. To the right side, this is a general statement right here. Stops sidereal tracking as telescope waits for the next object. Say you took your image and object entirely and then you slew into the next object. And say you told it to wait for it to rise to 30 degrees and the object is at 28 degrees when you finish imaging the first object. What Prism will do, it'll cut off track and it'll tell the mount not to track. This is for safety reasons. And then when the next object comes up above 30 degrees of elevation, then it resumes tracking and then goes over there and continues on. Plate solving. This is where you set up all your plate solves. So I always recommend to plate solve in at least 2 by 2. This reduces the size of the stars and makes it easy for the software to recognize the stars. You can choose, I typically choose 2 by 2 binning and 10 seconds with my reference filter, which is a luminance filter. I use UCAC. I just prefer it over GSC, which is included in Prism. You can choose 3 by 3. You can choose to take 30-second exposures to make sure you have enough stars. And this is a really good way of ensuring that all your plate solving succeeds. If you don't check this box right here, you're going to end up focusing whichever filter is used at the time. So if you're using a hydrogen alpha filter that is 3 nanometers wide, this could be problematic. I prefer to always plate solve with my reference filter, which is my luminance filter. German mount dead zone, ignored if meridian flip is not handled. So if your mount does not handle or declares that it handles meridian flips, this is ignored. So what this does is the following. Prism as a software does not do meridian flips. Prism causes a meridian flip. Let me explain. So if you are imaging, and let's go to the zenith here. As an object is coming from the east side, which is the left side here, it's rising and rising and rising and rising, and you're imaging it. Now, if the driver of your mount knows to do a meridian flip at the meridian, which has 0 time, that means that once Prism gets to here, if the mount does an automatic meridian flip, which is rare, it will just do a meridian flip. The mount will just stop here, and then it'll go all the way around and come back and pick it up here and go down. If you have an equatorial fork, this is not a problem because there are really no sides. But a German equatorial mount or an equatorial mount is going to have 2 sides. One side is the telescope, one side are the counterweights. So imagine you're imaging here. So your counterweight's on this side, the telescope is on this side, and vice versa. So if you tell your driver to do meridian flip at the meridian, which is 0, which means you can tell Prism here, stop imaging 10 minutes of time before the meridian. So the object gets to 10 minutes before the meridian. Prism will stop, and then Prism will tell it to go to 10 minutes after the meridian. So 10 minutes before, and then you go 10 minutes after the meridian. To explain this, let me zoom in so that you see a clear representation of what is going on here. This is very complex, and it's kind of a strange concept to most people, but it's actually very easy to explain and understand if you do it this way. So imagine this object, LBN 716. You're imaging it and you're tracking it. It gets closer and closer to the meridian because Earth's rotation naturally. Your driver is going to do a meridian flip at the meridian, this purple line, which is the 0 time right here. So if you tell Prism stop 10 minutes before, which means this object tracks here, when it gets to 10 minutes before the meridian, Prism is going to stop imaging and tracking. And what it does, since you told it to go after the meridian 10 minutes, it's going to tell the mount, hey, stop 10 minutes before and go 10 minutes after the meridian. Since you told your mount to flip at the meridian, if Prism slews to this side, that means your mount will do a meridian flip. It will go to the other side and do a meridian flip. So Prism successfully doing a meridian flip is entirely dependent on how you set up your driver. Prism does not do meridian flips. Prism causes meridian flips. If you have any questions about this, ask them in the comment section or go to my forum, please, and ask them there so we can all benefit from sharing information. Moving on. What happens after you do a meridian flip? Well, you can carry out all sky plate solving over, say, 10 degrees. If your mount doesn't point very well, Prism can solve that. It goes to the other side of the meridian flip, waits for the object to transition, and then takes an image, and then plate solves, and it looks over a 10-degree radius of the entire area, looking for the right location. When it finds it, it actually will center the object and keep imaging. Perform focusing after German mount flipping. This is especially helpful if you have a moving mirror. So if you go out there and your mirror moved, maybe your stars are out of focus now. So it'd be a good idea to perform focusing after the meridian flip. Synchronize CCD X and Y flip with the mount flip. What this does is it allows Prism to, or tells Prism to flip your images so they all match. What you do when you do a meridian flip, you actually flip your images by 180 degrees because you're looking the other way now. What Prism will do is actually flips the X and Y so that your images from before the meridian and after the meridian match. Prism can take your evening and morning flats if you wish. So if you enable this option up here, flat recording, Prism will do your flats for you. So you can choose which one to do, evening flats or morning flats. So you need to know what your system does and how it behaves to a setting sun. It could be you could choose the best time to do your flats. If you have super narrow filters, you can decide to do your flats just as the sun sets to have enough light to do that. So you can tell it to start up flat fields when sun elevation is higher than and less than this many degrees. So between this and just 0. And this way, when the sun sets, it can actually start taking flats, and it will stop at when the sun gets -10. And this is good for the morning too. When the sun is at -10 degrees below the horizon, it starts taking flats, and it stops when the sun actually rises. Stop sidereal tracking to perform flat fields. This is very important. So imagine you face straight up, your scope straight up to take your flats. You need to stop sidereal tracking so that stars drift in the image. And this way, when you stack your flats in Prism, it can, using the median statistical method, it can recognize stars as outliers and remove them. If your stars are pinpoint, it might not actually recognize them and leave them in your image. You don't want stars in your flats. You need to let them drift so that it's actually really efficient at removing them. Maximum exposure time. If you have narrow filters, again, you could even end up with 120 seconds. And if you have a mechanical shutter, which most cameras do, you can choose to do 2 seconds minimum to avoid the shutter shadow in your flats. This is very powerful. If you have some sort of a mechanism that is inside your dome, for example, you can close your dome or shelter to achieve flat fields. Just in case you have a light that you turn on, and you can close the dome, for example, and just shoot the side wall of the dome because it's a good gradient. You can force the telescope to be slew to the azimuth and elevation. Like I said earlier, you can choose 90 degrees east, and then you can go something like 80 degrees elevation, and this should point straight up. The way you add your flats here is super simple. So say I want to do my luminance flats, binning 1 by 1, of course. I want to shoot 11, and I want to do filter number 1, which is luminance. We can add it. And then for when I shoot RGB, I do 2 by 2 typically. So for red, I do 11, green, and then blue. So if I have hydrogen, which is typically 5, I want to go to 1 by 1, like this. And this will shoot them like this in the morning. So we can save this. This would be good for say when this would be good for the morning, because as the sun brightens up, you want the hydrogen to be done last, which means that the sun is closer to rising, which is a lot more light. So we can save this as morning flats. And the evening flat, you can just delete all these, and actually you can just redo them from the one that needs the brightest sky first, like that, and then you can go to blue, which is 4, and then but it's 2 by 2. Add green, and sorry, so this is filter number. Yep, lower this, and then luminance as 1 by 1. And you can save these as evening flats, like this. And the also the mirror flips are set according to the image grab. So if you do any of these guys, they're taken into account when you do your flats, of course, because your flats need to match. Prism includes a very powerful startup and shutdown procedures in it, in a way that it actually does all this for you. And let's start with the startup, the observation startup. So your system could be off, entirely off, your mount parked, your camera is not cooled, and the shutter or roll-off roof closed. And Prism can actually execute the entire operation to bring your entire setup up and running and wait for the right conditions to be set. This is extremely powerful because you can, at 3 p.m., you can go in your system, program, add all the targets you wish, and then press go and let it wait for the right conditions. Let's go. So it will be executed in this order, top to bottom, left to right. Again, you can choose to not execute any of this using this option over here. If your system is already up, say you got bored and you wanted to cool down your camera and park your mount, open the roof, and so on. You can use a PGM script for startup if you do anything that's not handled here. Say you have some sort of another program you want to start, you can start that here using the PGM script that is proprietary to Prism, or you can execute a startup script from an exe or a batch file. These two can be executed. Execute on and off switch sequence. So for this to happen, you need to go to your setup and include or program your switches here. You can have an ASCOM switch like digital loggers, and you can put that in here. So just for instance, let's set this up real fast. We're going to set up the simulator ASCOM. So let's say this is the CCD. Let's say this is the focuser. This is the mount right here. So this is set up right here, and so if you one condition is that this needs to be open. So here's the CCD, focuser, and mount. So when you want to execute your power startup, you go to parameters over here, and this opens up this pop-up window. What this helps you do is set up these guys to turn on in sequence. Let's add an entry. Let's say I want to start my mount first, because the mount just starts by itself and it doesn't do anything else. If you have a paramount and it's set to home, maybe you need some time. So do we want to execute this? Yes. Do you want to power on or off? I want it to power on. Let's say I want a delay of 60 seconds when it comes to this. So 60 seconds, it goes to the next one. I want to turn on my CCD, power on, and the camera needs 30 seconds. And the last one is the focuser. So let's add the focuser. Focuser, power on, 30 seconds. So all these will be executed in this order with respect to these delays. Press OK. So this will be executed first before connecting to your system. Idle waiting time for all these scripts to execute is 30 seconds. So when it executes these scripts or the startup, it actually waits 30 seconds as a delay to make sure everything starts up right. Link CCD camera and telescope to Prism, focuser, filter wheel, and all that. So this will link all your equipment. Either make sure you execute a startup like this, or all your equipment needs to be started up manually if you don't use this option. Open shelter or dome session at startup, if managed by Prism here, also managed by weather conditions. So if the dome is handled under Prism using, for example, a NASCOM driver, Prism will actually open it itself, or it'll use these options to open it. Execute CCD cooldown ramp according to a defined sequence. So this will cool down your camera according to the sequence you set. Let's open the main camera to see what this is. So if you go to CCD temp, and if this is handled, that is, you go here to edit, and here you can set up your cooldown and your warm up. So you can tell it to go, for example, to -20 in 10 minutes. Add. So this is what it'll do. It'll actually cool it down to reach this level, -20 over that set time. And warm up is actually using the other option in the shutdown or observation ending. Perform dome reset or homing. If you have a dome and it needs to be reset at the beginning of this startup sequence, then this is a good way to do it. Search automatically for the telescope position at startup over the radius of a certain number of degrees. So what this does, you can tell if your mount needs to be synchronized, and most mounts do at the beginning, you can tell it to go somewhere in the sky and plate solve and sync your mount. So if you tell it to search automatically for that, it's gonna go for somewhere like around here. You can tell it to go here, and in a meridian angle and declination, and take an image and plate solve using all sky plate solve to make sure that it finds the position of your mount and synchronizes the mount there. This is very powerful. Execute focusing at startup after first object slowing. So the first object in the list, when it goes to whichever one, so if you do it in this order, it'll actually go to this object first. So when it goes to that object, it focuses first. This is really good to focus your system before you do any plate solving, just in case that the temperature difference is big between last night and tonight. So startup conditions, you only have one choice. You can execute this immediately in case you, for example, you go to it, you set your targets at 9 p.m. It's already dark, and you can let Prism go and be on its way. Or you can execute this at a given day and a given time, at UTC time. Or you can tell it, hey, when the sun reaches -15 below the horizon, I want you to start the sequence. So Prism will start up all your equipment, and it'll wait for this time, whatever this time may be, to start your observation. Startup order. Do we want to start up the hardware and wait for good conditions or time selected? So at 3 p.m. when you do that, it'll start your equipment and cool down the camera and wait for all this, for the sun to be at this level to execute, to continue, to start imaging. Or do you start up with conditions met and connect the hardware? Or do you want to wait for the sun to reach this level, then connect the hardware, and then start the whole sequence at this time or at this time over here? Safety startup. Startup automatic observation only if this switch is selected. This is a way to let you have some sort of a safety system you can incorporate, and then tell Prism only start up if one switch is on. So you can program this yourself, and then this can go into your the one option for the okay, I see. So your switch here, you can just set it up yourself for wherever you need. This is a note. If the dome or shelter is not linked to Prism, all commands related to dome and shelter will be ignored. So if your dome or roll-off roof is not connected, of course that Prism cannot handle opening and closing and so on. And of course it will not, this option will not be available either to open and close, to pause and resume your observations. Observation ending or the shutdown sequence is similar to the startup or observation startup sequence. It's laid out the same way, left to right, top to bottom. So on top again, you can just choose to not do any of this. Nothing gets shuts down. Nothing gets shut down because maybe you want to use the telescope manually or something. But if you want to shut it down, it's very, very comprehensive, and it's really, really awesome. So you can park your telescope, tell it where to park it, maybe 90 degrees in elevation 0, so your scope is parallel to the ground, looking at the horizon, looking east. You can choose to warm up your CCD using the warm up tab that I showed you earlier. You can park your dome at an azimuth, certain azimuth, or you can choose to just perform reset or homing if you wish. This parking setting is really good if, for example, you want to park your dome in a way that your solar panels face the sun, and this is really handy to have. At the end, you can close your dome or shelter at the end of the observation, and you can choose to disconnect the camera. This is not going to happen before the camera warm up. If you enable this, the camera will warm up, and it'll take enough time to warm up to the level you want, then you'll disconnect the driver. You can execute the .exe file or a batch file, or you can choose to execute a Prism proprietary PGM script if you wish down here. This opens the door for a lot of things you can do with this. Turn off lights, turn off more other switches, or turn on a fan or something. You can execute again another sequence of these switches, and you can choose to turn them off because you started them at the beginning of the observation. This is a really good way to do this. You can just set them up like this. I recommend you don't shut them all off at the same time because it's just better like that. Putting in a little bit of a delay is good to have. Press OK and check this option. You can send an email at the end of the automatic observation, and this is set up in your main settings. So you go to Settings, Software Settings, and you can choose an Internet and Email option. You can set up your email here. You can set up your Gmail here or anything you want, and what Prism will do, will actually send you the log at the end of the observation. I typically wake up in the morning and this log is in my mailbox, and I know everything went well. Stop observations, image recording when the sun elevation is above. So this is where you tell it to stop imaging and start the shutdown sequence, or you can use a force it at a given time here. So if this is checked, then this applies. You can set a given time to actually shut down if you wish. FTP transfer on end of observation. This will offload all the images you just took this night at the end of the automatic observation. This helps with bandwidth. So imagine that you're imaging and using TeamViewer and so on, and you're dropping off files here, which could be a Dropbox folder, and just you using up a lot of bandwidth. This is especially important for people at remote sites with shared internet and all that. Prism can do this at the very end. You can use your just an FTP server here, and you can use it over TLS, which is safer and more secure. And of course, you can use a remote folder here, your login password, and the ports, and so on and so forth. The shutdown is extremely powerful because it allows you peace of mind to safeguard your equipment against weather and so on and so forth. If Prism pauses and then it takes a long time for the clouds to go by, or the weather becomes severe in a way that it's not safe to reopen the roof, this is the best way to just park your equipment. Save on power, like, is one of them. Imagine that you're completely autonomous and you have a bunch of batteries. You know, if you wait all the way to sunrise to shut down, then you're using a ton of power, which you might not have. So this way is a good way to safeguard your equipment. another great and powerful feature in Prism. The automatic observation can handle errors very well as well. If you enable this option, enable error management actions, this happens if something gets disconnected for your equipment, a USB cable gets pulled out, your camera stops working, something like that. These happen when errors occur during the automatic observation. Your Prism is just not going to leave your system hanging in the middle of a brewing storm, if you would. It'll actually shut down. So what it'll do, it'll let you park your telescope here, like we're going to park it like we did earlier. It'll close the dome or shelter as well, and it can even execute another file for you. This helps, and you can have this send you an email, you can have this give you a call, send you a text, whatever script you can think of, you can put here. If your telescope cannot be parked, Prism will stop the sidereal tracking for safety. If you stop the automatic observation manually, then the observation ending will not happen, as well as the error management will not happen, because you stopped it manually. It clearly proves that you're in front of the actual computer and looking at it. The execute tab is just that. You have a button here to execute the automatic observation. You have a button to stop it. Be patient. There's a lot going on here, so if you press it and Prism does not stop immediately, it's pretty much doing something in the back to make sure everything is safeguarded. So please be patient with this. Open the log folder. This is where all the logs are saved in Prism. So the automatic observation has its own log, and it's going to be created when you start these. And delete log, this clears this screen. It's almost like the CLS command. The bottom buttons we have discussed already. So this concludes this first part in explaining to you what the automatic observation does. It's a huge part of automation in Prism, and it allows you to be completely autonomous. It saves you a lot of time, and if you have any doubt about this, you should head to the testimonials section of my website to see what my customers are saying. It's saving people 2 to 3 hours a night total from having to set up, having to sit there and plate solve to center a target by hand, having to set up to make sure everything is working as it should. Prism takes all that away from you. You can choose your targets and you can press go, and it'll actually do just that. It'll go image, and then at the end of the night, it'll take your flats, it'll warm up your camera, it'll shut down, it'll close the roof, and it'll even send you an email to tell you, hey, everything went well, and here's the proof of it. It's very simple. It's left to right, top to bottom. If you follow this, you can't get lost. Everything is explained. And I hope that this video, there's a combination of small videos that I just made to make sure it helps you understand the power that you get. The automatic observation is part of Prism Professional and Prism Advanced. If you have any questions, please head to my forum and ask them. If you haven't signed up already, I encourage you to do that. The Prism family is getting bigger, and would like to hear from you. Share your pictures with us, share your frustrations with us, or your solutions with us. You're welcome, and it's open to everyone. I appreciate your time, and I really thank you for watching my videos and being a member of the Prism family. You have a great day now, and clear skies to you.